Hello and welcome and namaste from New Delhi. You're watching DD India. I'm Gautam Roy and we're keeping the focus for this hour on India's budget for the financial year 26-27, which was presented just a short while back by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. There's a lot to chew on there in terms of both budgetary and tax proposals, and we'll get down to it right away with me and my colleague Mungun Bhattacharya.
Yes, good afternoon to all the viewers. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has created two records today. First, by presenting India's first union budget on a Sunday, and second, her 9th consecutive budget speech. Her proposals hold a lot for different sectors of the economy, from infrastructure and capital goods to frontier tech sectors like cloud, semiconductors and rare earths. The MSME sector has also got a boost, along with major employers like textiles, hospitality and healthcare, to name a few. We'll dive into all of that with experts' guests as well. But first, the headlines.
Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presents a record 9th consecutive union budget, says it's guided by a 3 Kartavyas or duties framework to drive economic growth and inclusion.
Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman proposes no changes in direct taxes in Budget 2026. The new IT Act will take effect from the 1st of April.
The FM projects fiscal deficit for FY 26-27 at 4.3% of the GDP, slightly lower than the 4.4% estimated for current financial year. Raises capex to 12.2 lakh crore Indian rupees for FY 26-27, 9% up.
And budget proposes India Semiconductor Mission 2.0 with a hiked outlay of 40,000 crore rupees, 10,000 crore rupees over 5 years to make India a biopharma hub, and dedicated rare earth corridors for mineral-rich states. And joining us for Perspective, our guest, we have Shubhamoy Bhattacharya, who is a senior economic journalist with us. Also joining us is Prasenjit K. Basu, senior economist. Mr. Basu, we are still taking the initial reactions to the budget. So what do you think is the biggest takeaway to your mind?
I think the major takeaway is that there is a focus both on new age sectors like semiconductors, Semiconductor Mission 2.0, biopharmaceuticals. You know, India is a global leader in generic drug manufacturing, but in new drug discovery, we haven't yet made a major impact. I think this budget contains a big focus on biopharmaceuticals as the single largest area of manufacturing focus. That's very good. Now, in addition to that, I think in the agriculture sector, the economic survey talked about the need for value-added crops. So there's a whole lot of incentives for a number of different types of crops where India has a relative comparative advantage. So a move away from water-intensive crops like rice to things like coconuts and so on, where we are a major producer, but there is scope for much greater focus. So that, plus of course labor-intensive manufacturing. Now, if you just think about labor-intensive manufacturing, that dovetails beautifully with the new labor codes that were notified at the end of November. So we're just 2 months into the new labor codes, which have significantly liberalized the labor market and made it much more flexible. Dovetailing into that is the focus on things like textiles, leather, etc., that will be benefiting from the new labor codes, we need a shift away from countries like China and Vietnam that currently dominate textiles and garments. India, as I always say, has been the clothier to the world through most of history, the last 2,500 years, except the last 75. So this textile focus is very good. Because the labor laws have been changed to make it more competitive. Now the government is also putting some money behind it. So in terms of the tax structure, of course, last year was the big bang budget. after last year's big bang, this year is pretty ho-hum in terms of tax changes. The major changes are pretty minor, mainly in things like improving the structure of import tariffs to benefit particular industries, including health and tourism. So those are areas that will benefit and will generate a lot of employment. So there's a long-term focus in this year's budget, not so much on the short-term aspects of tax changes.
Right. Shubhamay, what is your view on the budget, particularly when it comes to the direct taxes? There's not much on the face of it, but the new IT Act comes into force from the 1st of April. Now, what is a common taxpayer has to look forward to where that particular change is concerned or transition is concerned?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, of course, I wasn't expecting any change in the direct taxes. So, and that's exactly what has happened. In fact, for the common taxpayer, the interesting thing is the change in the securities transaction tax. You know, the big change that has been done, and this is going to be discussed in the days to come, is the STT has been raised on futures and options market. And it's a steep rise.
Is it a marginal? How do you
It's a sharp rise. It's a sharp rise in the futures and options market, almost a 50% rise. Right, from gone up from 0.02 to 0.05.
Yeah.
So it's a sharp rise, and it's deliberate to ensure that people do not speculate in the market. The retail investors, because the futures and options market, the volumes in the retail segment was jumping up massively, and that is something that the government has really decided to cut down on. So the securities and STT is the big talking point that will be happening, that in terms of the jump that has been done, and that is something that will be interesting to look at for what you should say, the Aam Aadmi. The big thing is the budget this time is focused essentially on the labor intensive sector. So employment is the big theme. Remember, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of discussion about.
And at the same time, it
schemes.
also addresses issues of sectors which are bearing the brunt right now of the American tariffs.
That's exactly the point, that what you'd get right now is that this budget comes in the background of two very major developments for India, which is that the India-EU FTA has been signed. Many of the provisions here you can see are actually helping sectors which will be pushing for exports into the EU region, like the chemical parks and others, essentially to get into those those benefits. The impact of the Trump tariffs has played out in terms of the fact that the finance minister has pushed in money for sectors where there can be manufacturing expansion. And that, I think, is a very important thing, because this is going to play out over time. And I particularly like her forward thing about the rare earth corridor. This is something that often is not understood, but the implication of the rare earth permanent magnet corridor in the 4 states is going to be very significant in terms of their implication in the sectors. The one thing that has been done very majorly is to allow investment by non-resident Indians, almost doubling their ability to invest in Indian equities. So for Indian equities, that is a very major flow of funds that would be coming in. Indian companies are now big, and in fact there are 2 things that you would notice. She has cut down on, she has taxed share buyback, discouraging companies from going out of the market. At the same time, to promote equities, she has said that foreign Indians abroad can now, instead of the 10% limit, it's been gone up to 24%, can invest majorly into Indian equities. So what's happening is that if a company comes into the market, there is going to be much more finance liquidity available for that company to be able to play in. And I think that gives a much larger space for investments to come in. We had all often talked about foreign investors coming in. We talked about the FIIs.
More IPOs.
Yeah, this is something which actually promotes the IPOs. You know, the huge rush of IPOs that's happening, and it allows Indians abroad to be able to come into the market in a big time. That is something which is quite a bit of a change from several decades, which had been saying that we don't want
do you think
money
that
coming
the
in.
FII is also food for thought?
Yes, and so the FIIs therefore will find that there is a fresh competition, because we had been saying that while the FIIs have been going out, the market has been propped up only by the domestic investors.
Right.
Now there's an additional ballast to the domestic investors, the investors coming in, the Indian investors coming in from abroad, and that actually does something very major, because if this plays out, this is going to be helping the rupee very strongly. The value of the rupee will be
because they'll buy in foreign exchange.
Yes, because that will mean that there's a large pressure, upward pressure, which will come on the Indian rupee. So this is actually going to help the valuation of Indian companies when we look at the dollar rate of their performance. So there's so these three measures, cutting down FNO by taxation, retail investors, making the investors come along lightly.
Yes, you can pick up the mic, but interesting points being made there on decisions that have been taken in this budget, or proposals that have been made that give a push to foreign investment and also prop up the rupee. Let's get perspective now from our colleague and correspondent Mark Lynn, who's joining us. Mark, you've told us broadly speaking, the main takeaways from the budget. But if you could tell us how this budget is helping the Aam Aadmi. We understand that there's more focus on education, skills, and hostels. There's going to be easier credit for MSMEs, and there are better healthcare access announcements that have been made. Also faster travel, better urban mobility, and cheaper foreign travel.
Indeed. So if we look at the way the budget has been designed, we can see clearly that there is one whole aspect of the Kartavya 2, which is on aspirations. And the aspirations are of the people of India, not only of the youth of India. So we can see that the Aam Aadmi is very much a part of this. And we look at a high-powered committee which has been set up for education to employment to enterprise. So this is one committee that's going to look at everything to try and get the aim to make India be a global leader in services with about 10% of the global share by 2047. And its impact is on emerging technologies, including AI, on jobs, skills, as the name suggests. And also they're supposed to suggest measures. Then there is also the aspect of trying to move into tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where we know you had professional services of people who are involved with the corporate sector, maybe like chartered accountants and financial analysts and all that. But something called corporate mitras now, people who have enough understanding who can help set up enterprise in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. This is another aspect of the budget which we can say is going to benefit job creation and the common man. Also, we can see that health is very important as a sector, and the importance of Ayush, particularly the setting up of 3 all-India institutes of Ayurveda, and then the upgrading of Ayush pharmacies and drug testing labs. Also the upgradation of the WHO Global Telemedicine Center in Jamnagar. All these are looking at improving health. And also there has been a huge segment on tourism. As we know, that tourism can be a great job creator and an employer. And India has, despite the beauty of India and the various advantages that India has naturally for tourism, we haven't really got our full potential there. And we can see that the Buddhist circuits now being developed in the northeast. Then also we have trekking to be developed in certain areas. And there's an institute of hospitality also being created to upgrade the skills in terms of tourism. Munmun.
All right, Mark, just stay with us. We're also joined by senior economist Rajat Kathuria. Rajat Kathuria, what do you make of the union budget in the first place? We've talked about direct tax proposals, but in terms of fiscal prudence itself, do you think the budget is taking the task that was laid after COVID, when India had to increase a lot of spending, breach some of those guidelines that were there initially? But are we on that path now? And what kind of an impact would it have overall in the economy and on people as well?
So, I think, so thanks Gautam. Let me just say that, since I'm not in the studio, I'm unable to see your body language. So stop me when you want to, if I'm sort of going on longer than you think I should, so just stop me. I think the macroeconomic stability is one of the positives that has happened for India over the last few years. We've been growing at significant rates, 7.5%, and I think this year as well we'll grow at about 7.4%. I think the weakness has been in the nominal rate of growth. So a nominal GDP is growing only at 8% this year, and hopefully it will pick up as inflation picks up and we get price signals. Hopefully that will pick up. Now that has implications for the questions that you're asking. I think post-COVID we did fairly well. We had a fiscal stimulus and then we withdrew. We had direct tax and indirect tax proposals. GST revenues picked up, so our revenue position became a little comfortable. And therefore, the finance minister was able to reduce the fiscal deficit, over time, sequentially, from 4.9% to 4.7 to 4.5. Now, this year to 4.4, and next year to 4.3. She would have liked to go to 4.0 next year, but I think given what's happened to the nominal GDP, she has just reduced the fiscal deficit by about 10 basis points for next year. But I think I commend her for maintaining fiscal consolidation, whether it's through the fiscal deficit or whether it's through the debt to GDP ratio. So that's the positive. The macroeconomic situation is the positive. The weakness, I think, as I was saying, is the lack of growth in the nominal GDP. But what's happened, if you look at the numbers, we don't have the numbers. I don't think the finance minister had time today to tell us what the nominal GDP growth rate is going to be or what the real growth rate is going to be. But what's happened over time is that there has been a change in the sources of revenue for the government and change in the nature of expenditure. I think the government has been doing the heavy lifting as far as capital investment is concerned, and capital investment is critical to grow.
Right.
Given the incremental capital output ratio about 5, if we are investing about 34% of GDP, we grow at about 7% or thereabouts. I think government has been doing the heavy lifting in the sense that it's been investing more in capital. Revenue expenditure has come down from the projected rate, so there's been some shortfall of government revenue expenditure, which is why we've been able to maintain the fiscal deficit. But no quibbles with that. I think let me just say one more thing, which is what Shubhamoy had begun to allude to and what everybody is talking about. I think our big growth momentum that happened in 1991, 2004 were on the back of private investment. And I think the government wants private investment to come back. So a lot of the reform measures that you see that have been begun in this budget are directed to getting back private investment into the country. And what Shubhamoy was just saying about foreign investment is absolutely right. You want to get foreign investment back into the country. You want to grow on the back of foreign investment because it has a knock-on effect on domestic investment, both in terms of technology, managerial skills, and competition. So I think that's a very good sign. Get more foreign investment. And I think one of the things that will be talked about for a long, long time post this budget, as Shubhamoy said, one is, of course, the STT, which has gone up. But the other thing is the massive tax holiday that the finance minister has announced in the new age sectors for the data centers and for investors who are going to set up long-term investments in the country. I mean, they go up to 25 years and 15 years. I think that's a good sign to get those investments in the new age sectors because India does have a comparative advantage. We have the software, we need the hardware, and if you combine our soft skills, which are a comparative advantage, along with the hardware, then I think we've become leaders in design as well, which is another focus of this year's
Absolutely.
budget. I've stopped it.
I'll just tell Rajat, from the data that's coming up, for the budget glance, you see that the nominal growth rate has been pegged at 10%.
10%.
Yes.
I missed that announcement in the budget. Yes.
No, it was in the budget, the other documents. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So let's now take the viewers through some of the excerpts of the Finance Minister's speech. India's Finance Minister presented the Union Budget for FY 2026-27 in Parliament, and in a speech, she said that our aim is to transform aspiration into achievement and potential into performance as we ensure that the dividends of growth reach every section of society. She termed the budget as a Yuva Shakti-driven one.
Our aim is to transform aspiration into achievement and potential into performance as we ensure that the dividends of growth reach every farmer, the scheduled caste, the scheduled tribes, the nomads, the youth, the poor, and the women. In Vikasit Bharat Young Leaders Dialogue 2026, several innovative ideas were shared with our Prime Minister, which have inspired many of the proposals, making this a unique Yuva Shakti-driven budget.
And calling this the first budget prepared at Kartavya Bhavan, the Finance Minister also said that the government is drawing inspiration from 3 core Kartavyas or duties aimed at strengthening India's economic and social foundations amid global uncertainty.
We are inspired by 3 Kartavya. Our first Kartavya is to accelerate and sustain economic growth by enhancing productivity and competitiveness and building resilience to volatile global dynamics. Our second Kartavya is to fulfill aspirations of our people and build their capacity, making them strong partners in India's path to prosperity. Our third Kartavya, aligned with our vision of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, is to ensure that every family, community, region, and sector has access to resources, amenities, and opportunities for meaningful participation.
The Finance Minister announced 3 new chemical parks to boost domestic manufacturing and cut import dependence.
To enhance domestic chemical production and reduction import dependency and reduce import dependency, we will launch a scheme to support states in establishing 3 dedicated chemical parks through challenge route on a cluster-based plug-and-play model.
And the FM also proposed the setting up of Mahatma Gandhi Gram Swaraj initiative to strengthen khadi, handloom and handicraft, aiming to boost rural livelihoods, manufacturing as well as self-reliance.
I propose to launch the Mahatma Gandhi Gram Swaraj initiative to strengthen khadi, handloom and handicrafts. This will help in global market linkage and branding. It will streamline and support training, skilling, quality of process and production. This will benefit our weavers, village industries, One District, One Product ODOP initiative and also our rural youth.
Outlining a 6-step strategy to accelerate long-term economic growth, the Finance Minister highlighted scaling up manufacturing in 7 strategic sectors, reviving legacy industries, creating champion MSMEs, pushing infrastructure development, ensuring economic security and stability, and building city-based economic regions as engines of growth.
Under our first Kartavya, to accelerate and sustain economic growth, I propose interventions in 6 areas. 1. Scaling up manufacturing in 7 strategic and frontier sectors. 2. Rejuvenating legacy industrial sectors. 3. Creating champion MSMEs. 4. Delivering a powerful push for infrastructure. 5. Ensuring long-term security and stability. And 6. Developing city economic regions.
And the Finance Minister also announced a sharp increase in capital expenditure, raising the capex target to 12.2 lakh crore Indian rupees for FY 2027, up from 11.2 lakh crore rupees in the current fiscal year.
Public capital expenditure has increased manifold from 2 lakh crore in 2014-15 to an allocation of 11.2 lakh crore in BE 25-26. In this coming year, that is financial year 2026-27, I propose to increase it to 12.2 lakh crores to continue the momentum.
And Meghna Dev, our correspondent, is now joining us from Ahmedabad in Gujarat. Meghna, Gujarat-related announcements have also been made. For instance, establishment of new dedicated freight corridors connecting, one is Dankuni in the east to Surat in the west, and there are more. So how is Gujarat reacting to the budget announcements? Is it welcoming it?
Yes, Munmun, I'm here at CII Gujarat, and we are joined in by Jayant Murthy, who handles the manufacturing panel of CII Gujarat. Definitely, we already had a discussion on the announcements, but obviously, looking at finer details will give us more insight into how long impacts the announcements will create. But for now, we are joined in by Jayant Murthy. Sir, we'll be talking about obviously the manufacturing sector because you handle that sector for CII Gujarat. How do you see the announcements made for the sector?
I think it's very positive because Gujarat is a very strong manufacturing base, right? So it's a state which is powered by manufacturing, and it has a large base of small and micro manufacturing industries, and of course large players in manufacturing like petrochemicals, pharma, refining, etc. If you notice, the Honorable Finance Minister has talked about focusing on 7 strategic sectors, and most of those sectors are in Gujarat. So it will be a very positive boost. One thing that comes to my mind very interestingly is Commonwealth has been announced. And this will provide a great opportunity for manufacturing of sports goods and equipments, which there is no share of Gujarat in particularly in that. And I think there's a great opportunity for Gujarat to take this opportunity and get into sports goods and equipments, especially for the small and medium enterprises. I think that's a great opportunity. There is also a big announcement to support the textile industry, which is again very good news for Gujarat because Gujarat is very strong in textile, especially in southern part in Surat. So that should also be a big boost for Gujarat.
Besides that, which are the other sectors, manufacturing specific? We're talking about container manufacturing also. We are also talking about airplane manufacturing, which has also got some incentives. So from small businesses like the sports goods industry, which will obviously be hearing this budget very closely because it is a good news for them. But big manufacturing units, what do you have to say about that? And also one of the important aspects is the biopharma Shakti that has been announced, because pharmaceutical industry is huge in Gujarat. I think about 45% of all India pharma is manufactured from Gujarat. So what do you have to say about these specific sectors, from big manufacturing to obviously the biopharma?
So, see, almost 40+% of pharma is produced in Gujarat. And Gujarat is very familiar with pharma manufacturing. And as you know, globally, we are moving away from chemical-based pharma products to more biosimilars and bio-based. And I think that will be a new sunrise sort of industry. Of course, investments have already been made. But if you look at the large players in the sector like Biocon, etc., they don't have a significant footprint in Gujarat. So I think after these announcements, there should be a surge in the investments, both in R&D and manufacturing investments in biosimilars and bio-based pharmaceutical products in Gujarat.
And about the container manufacturing and the aircraft manufacturing?
Yes, there was also the Honorable Finance Minister talked about Dholera. And Dholera is going to be, we recently had a relationship and some kind of an agreement with UAE, which focused on MRO, maintenance and repair of aircrafts in Dholera. So I think there's going to be a lot of action in Dholera. It's already a very lot of focus in Dholera. So maybe MRO will come in. There will be also, there is announcement of coastal ways for shipment. So this will also boost ship manufacturing, ship repair, and using ships to transport, into Gujarat and out of Gujarat within India. I'm not saying just for exports. And lastly, there's a big boost for container manufacturing. And personally, manufacturing containers is not very high tech. If Gujarat has a lot of manufacturing.
Statements 2026-27, Honorable Finance Minister Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman ji.
Sir, with your permission again, I rise to lay on the table a copy each in English and Hindi of the following papers under Section 3(1) of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003. medium-term fiscal policy cum fiscal policy strategy statement, macroeconomic framework statement.
Papers to be laid on the table, Honorable Finance Minister, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman ji.
Sir, I rise to lay on the table under Article 281 of the Constitution a copy each in Hindi and English of the following papers. A report of the 16th Finance Commission for the years 2026 to 31. B. Explanatory memorandum on the action taken on the recommendations contained in the report of the 16th Finance Commission.
The House stands adjourned to meet at 11 a.m. on Monday, the 2nd February 2026.
And we continue to be joined by guests here in the studio. Shubhamoy, what's been penalized in the budget is another interesting question. One is non-disclosure of movable assets, but those valued at less than 20 lakhs have been exempted. The other is income tax misreporting. So penalty has been raised to 100% of the tax amount. Could you elaborate on this?
Well, essentially, I mean, along with that, you should also see that she has given a broader window for tax, for sort of, I wouldn't call it amnesty, but for the formless declaration and all those things, and filings and all those things. And she said that, look, if you do it, I'm willing to be with you. And lots of, if you look at the other factors where, people who are making genuine mistakes, she's sort of given them the space. But she wants essentially to build on the fact that there are larger number of people who are coming into the tax net. So to give a data, our income tax filers was about 6.2 till a couple of years ago. It has gone up to 9.5 crore in last year.
Yeah, the economic survey had put that out.
Yes, it's a huge number jump. Now the finance minister would want that sort of trend to continue, because tax, as a tax GDP ratio, the direct taxes has gone up to just 55%, and this is a very good thing. It used to be 51, and remember we used to be discussing why the tax GDP ratio, direct tax GDP ratio was not rising. So it has risen. So she wants to build on that, and to ensure that it's built on, she's essentially again doing the same, doing the thing about allowing more space for genuine filers to sort of come up and file, giving them the additional space, but becoming more and more strict for misdeclaration, deliberate attempts to evade taxes. And I think that was necessary also, because you remember this is also the year when the direct tax code has just come into play. The income tax code, the new income tax code, which was accepted by the parliament, which was passed by the parliament in December, has just come into play and will become effective from April 2026. So it was necessary to allow all those provisions. So there's a large number of those provisions that she's announced, which are part of the finance code, which have been brought in as part of the new business transactional rules of the government of India. They seem, they essentially give that focus that what the government wants to do with its taxes. Because remember, there's also on the indirect taxes, there's a large number of simplifications correspondingly. On customs, for instance, there's a customs process simplification that is fairly elaborate and fairly useful, and it allows for easier importing of goods into India,
especially for personal use.
But you also see on the customs bonded warehouse and others, she's allowed for lots of facilities. The area for the scope for advanced ruling in customs has been extended from 3 years to 5 years. All of these essentially help in what we call the ease of doing business. But the flip side would be that while that's happening, the state is becoming much more tighter and drawing the noose around the assessees who are not really playing ball with the government. And I think that this is a process that will continue. Remember, despite everything, I was looking at the budget numbers. The tax revenue this year has just risen about 9%. It was supposed to be 12%, and that was because
this includes both direct and indirect taxes
and everything taken together. Now that was supposed to be a nice rise, but because of lots of factors, slowdown in the global economy and everything, that the tax rise hasn't happened. So obviously the finance minister cannot afford in these circumstances to let people who can pay and who should pay the taxes go away. There is a very interesting change that she has done in in that context of making the MAT as the final tax. She has, for corporates, remember this, there was a lot of change that was done in 2019 in the corporate tax structure. For the first time, she has moved in this time to further simplify that, to say that what will be the effective taxation structure for companies which come into new manufacturing, those giving them the benefits of saying that first of all the MAT from 15% it is brought down to 14%, but as the final tax, but that has to be paid up. So the tax credit, how much it can be taken on, how much it can be extended, all of these she has clarified, simplified, but made them much more effective in the sense that the companies will have to pay up, and that I think is something that is very useful. Remember, we are looking at the idea that there will be lots more manufacturing, lots more happening in the manufacturing sector. So you would be expecting new companies to come in. So you want the field to be clean and clear for them, so that they don't have to play around with tax laws and rules, rather than getting along with the work that they want to do, which is that of production. So those changes that she has brought in have been very substantial. In fact, they become even more significant if you look at her deficit numbers. She was playing from a very difficult wicket. I was just looking at the deficit numbers. Almost all of the deficit numbers in absolute terms have gone up a bit because of the difficulties that India is facing. And the primary deficit, which had come down to something like 2,74,000, that has gone up to actually to 2,84,000. Now, what does that mean? That the government, which was actually borrowing less effectively, has this year, because of the gap in taxation, expects to borrow a bit more, which is what you're also seeing in the drawdown of cash balances, which you're also seeing in the draw that she's made on small savings. But all of these will be actually, she'll be depending on more.
Let me just point out that in the year to date, the data has been announced yesterday. In the year to date, there's a primary fiscal surplus. The deficit was supposed to be, primary deficit was supposed to be 0.8% of GDP, but in fact, from April to December, there was a primary surplus. The government is very conservative. Every year, the government has been very conservative in measuring its deficit numbers. Year to date this year, in the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, the fiscal deficit is 3.2% of GDP. If you look at the deficit for the first 3 quarters of the year, it is only 54.5% of the full year FY26 deficit. So you have 1 quarter left. Unless the government has a huge assignment to the states, it is actually likely to outperform. Every year it has outperformed in the last 4 years. It is outperformed. The actual deficit will be lower than what was projected in the budget. So it's quite unfortunate that.
And what about the other critical number?
See, the point is that nominal GDP growth has been modest. Real GDP growth has been above what the government is projecting. The number for the year to date is 8% in the first half of the fiscal year. The real GDP growth was 8%. But in fact, in the second half, there's a fiscal stimulus provided in the middle of the year. One is the GST rate reductions. Second is income tax reductions for the whole year, FY26. That is going to boost real and nominal GDP growth in the second half of the year. We're likely to get 8.5% real GDP growth. If you look at the last 4.5 years, every year the projection is lower than the actual outcome.
It's conservative.
So we actually, if you look at, I'm surprised that V. Anantha Nageswaran has been talking about 7% real GDP growth as being the new normal, as being the potential growth rate. The reality is that in the last 4.5 years, real GDP has grown 8.2% on average, and is likely to be slightly more than that in the second half of the fiscal year and into the first part of the next fiscal year. So, in fact, we have stronger growth. Rajat was talking about the fact that nominal GDP is not growing that strongly because inflation is too low. It's nice to be one of the few countries in the world that has too low inflation. But inflation is about to pick up. We're going to see inflation get closer to 2% by the current quarter, and then rise a little bit more to the normal 2 to 3% range. 2 to 3% range is perfectly reasonable for a fast-growing economy to have that sort of inflation rate. If you have 8.5% real growth and 2% inflation, you'll get 10.5% nominal GDP growth, which is more than adequate to continue to provide a boost to direct tax revenue as well as indirect tax revenue. Now, what I find quite interesting in the actual numbers is that even though income tax rates were cut, in the year to date, April to December, you had about 6% growth in income tax revenues, despite the substantial reductions in rates across the board. And if you look at corporate tax revenue, people in the equity markets have been focused on the fact that EPS growth, earnings growth for corporates has been rather weak. But interestingly, if you look at the December number, corporate tax revenue is up very strongly, and the October to December quarter saw a very powerful turnaround in corporate tax revenue to the government. So in the calendar year 2025, there was 15.5% year-on-year growth in corporate tax revenue. The previous year was only 3 to 4%. So we've seen a very strong rebound in corporate tax revenue, which to my mind is about to be reflected in the next quarterly series of corporate earnings reports in a recovery. If the government is getting more corporate tax revenue, surely corporate earnings are growing, and that'll be reflected in the next quarter. So the worst is probably behind us in terms of the earnings growth performance of the corporate sector. It has already seen a recovery evident in the corporate tax revenue, and I think we'll continue to see that coming through. Now, it's quite interesting that in the budget for next year, there's been no significant changes in the direct or indirect tax regime. The main thing is ease of reporting, etc., has been brought in, and some penalties, particularly for things like futures and options, which SEBI for the last 6 to 8 months has already been flagging as being an area. India's options, futures and options trading is the highest of any country on earth. We have excessive involvement in the options and trading market. There's too much speculation, and so the government wants to calm that down. It has very few revenue implications because STT is not a big source of revenue to the government, but it's a penalty. But if you look at the major sources of revenue, corporate and income tax revenue have held up remarkably well, despite the fact that personal income tax was cut drastically in the latest budget. So it's provided a boost to personal consumption, but at the same time hasn't hurt revenue that much. I mean, we've seen if you look at personal income tax revenue growth, it's only 6%, which is very modest because the previous few years it was growing at 20% for 2 or 3 years. Personal income tax revenue was a big source of revenue to the government in terms of growth. Corporate tax was weak. Yes. Now we've seen a shift. Corporate tax is the one that is contributing much more in the current fiscal year. Personal income tax has come down as a source. But I think the overall picture, though, is that we are likely to get 8.5% real GDP growth, inflation at a 15-year low, and the current account deficit will be near zero this fiscal year. So very positive macroeconomic backdrop. Stability on the macroeconomy is one of the big positives of recent years, and that actually flows through eventually in the form of a better growth environment, because you have stability on inflation. You have now, for some of the newer areas, there is 20-year tax holiday being provided up to 2047. It's quite remarkable. It's rare to see any country providing that sort of tax holiday. But a 20-year tax holiday, the idea is to incentivize a pickup in private investment in a number of newer areas. And that, I think, is really the key to pushing long-term growth to an even higher plane. And one of the areas, of course, is labor-intensive manufacturing, which is the one area where over the last 75 years we've done relatively poorly in compared to, say, China and Vietnam. This budget has a lot of incentives as well as actual money provided to labor-intensive manufacturing to see a significant leg up there, so that we can really see employment pick up in in the millions.
Okay, Rajat Kathuria, if I can come to you and talk to you about another key macro number, which is the debt to GDP ratio, which is in the range of 56% right now, but the aspiration is to bring it down around 50% over the next few years. How do you think that will help the economy in general?
You know, it gives much more fiscal, a moderate debt to GDP ratio for developing countries like India, around 50% by the year 2030. I think that's a good aspiration to have. It essentially sort of mirrors what a fiscal deficit would tell you, is that with a growing economy and declining interest payments, what both Shubhamoy and Prashanjit were referring to, if you have declining interest payments, so the debt to GDP ratio will decline. When the government borrows more and the growth rate falls, then the debt to GDP ratio is likely to go up. And I'm talking about nominal GDP here. If that falls, then the debt to GDP ratio sort of tends to rise if you borrow too much. So there's debt dynamics of the economy, which on a declining trend allows much more fiscal space to the government to get away from making interest payments on borrowed debt and thereby invest money productively in capital investment. So declining, so previously our anchor used to be the fiscal deficit under Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, and now the anchor has moved to a debt to
इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हो, सेमीकंडक्टर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हो और आईटी सर्विसेज के लिए बहुत एक सिग्निफिकेंट सिंप्लीफिकेशन किया गया है सेफ हार्बर और फास्ट ट्रैक एपीए के प्रोविजंस लाके। आने वाले समय में डेटा सेंटर्स बहुत बड़ी एक ताकत बनेंगे देश की, जिससे कि दुनिया भर को नई सर्विसेज और भारत के लिए नए एम्प्लॉयमेंट और एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप के नए रास्ते खुलेंगे। तो डेटा सेंटर्स पे जो टैक्स हॉलीडे दिया, इसके लिए मैं माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी को और माननीय वित्त मंत्री जी को धन्यवाद देना चाहूँगा। साथ ही साथ ऑरेंज इकोनॉमी जो हमारी क्रिएटर्स इकोनॉमी है, इसमें 20 लाख एम्प्लॉयमेंट नए बनाने के लिए क्रिएटर्स इकोनॉमी में आईआईसीटी मुंबई के साथ मिलकर 15,000 स्कूल और 500 कॉलेजेस में क्रिएटर्स लैब बनाने के लिए बजट में प्रोविज़न किया गया है। और साथ ही साथ रेलवे के लिए 7 नए हाई स्पीड कॉरिडोर्स, चेन्नई से बेंगलुरु, चेन्नई से हैदराबाद, बेंगलुरु से हैदराबाद, मुंबई से पुणे, पुणे से हैदराबाद, दिल्ली से वाराणसी और वाराणसी से सिलीगुड़ी। एक तरीके से साउथ इंडिया में सदर्न ट्रायंगल बनेगा, चेन्नई, बेंगलुरु, हैदराबाद का हाई स्पीड रेलवे का, बुलेट ट्रेन का। वैसे ही दिल्ली, वाराणसी, सिलीगुड़ी का एक नया हाई स्पीड कॉरिडोर बनेगा और साउथ वेस्ट को साउथ से जोड़ने वाला मुंबई से पुणे, पुणे से हैदराबाद का एक बहुत बड़ा मेजर कॉरिडोर बनेगा। साथ ही साथ आज बजट में एक नए डेडिकेटेड फ्रेट कॉरिडोर जो कि बंगाल में दांकुनी, वहाँ से गुजरात में सूरत, इसको जोड़ने वाला, ईस्ट को वेस्ट के साथ जोड़ने वाला नया डीएफसी भी सैंक्शन हुआ है। मैं इस बजट के लिए जो कि युवा शक्ति से प्रेरित है, जो कि विकसित भारत की एक मजबूत नींव बनाता है, जो कि समाज के हर वर्ग के लिए और देश के हर क्षेत्र के लिए विकास का एक नया माध्यम बना है, इसके लिए मैं माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, माननीय वित्त मंत्री जी का अभिनंदन करता हूँ।
बजट में कितना लोकेशन किया गया?
Railways, Methi, and Information and Broadcasting reacting to budget announcements on the three portfolios that he has. Well, we continue our discussion. The first thing that he spoke of, Rajat, if we can come to you on this, is the tax holiday till 2047. Again, a point being made here in the studio that this is unprecedented, at least in recent times. We haven't heard something like this. Tax holiday till 2047 to any foreign company providing cloud services to customers globally using data center services from India. If you could explain to us how this is going to boost India's digital economy, what are the spin-off benefits that India can expect from this?
Well, India has always prided itself as being sort of a global leader in digital services, not so much in the manufacturing of hardware, although we have technology and semiconductor mission now put into place, which will dovetail with what the minister is saying or what the finance minister is saying about the tax holiday. I think the aspiration is straightforward, is that we have a comparative advantage in the skills related to digital services. Remember, India is two sort of economies put into one. One is India and the other is Bharat. One is we aspire to be at the frontier with where the rest of the global economy is, especially in digital services, and the other is the other sort of rural informal sector. So for the sectors that aspires to compete globally, I think this is a great sign, because India has for a long time wanted to host data centers within the country. And data centers require, I think, land, require power, require water, things that we are beginning to now provide. And I think it will also create employment in this sector for the people, so for the hordes of students. I work in a university today, and the anecdotal evidence that suggests to me that the most popular course, not only in my university, but the most popular course in any university in India today is computer science. And within computer science, it's coding and AI, etc. Although a lot of people say that, AI is going to get rid of coders, nonetheless, or at least, dampen that demand. Nonetheless, I think, technology, digital, AI experts in India would get gainful employment if we are able to employ these people within the country through investments that are made by foreigners who bring in technology and therefore bring in managerial skills. Now that will, as I said in my previous comment also, this will have knock-on effects on domestic investment as well. So I think it's a good idea. It is playing to India's strengths by giving a tax holiday for such a long time up till 2047. You're also incentivizing foreign investors. Remember, in the global economy, the sort of growth centers now after China are sort of very limited. Africa will probably emerge as the next growth center in a few decades. Today, India is the toast, and I think we should leverage this opportunity that we have. And clearly, AI, data centers, hardware, semiconductors, technology, etc., content creation, the orange economy that the minister was talking about. I mean, this is certainly a sector that we can leverage. But sort of, if you give me an opportunity, let me conclude the comment that I had made, beginning to make before you sort of went to the minister, which is that, the debt to GDP ratio. What Prasanjit was saying about why have there been no sort of major announcements in this budget with respect to tax. And he's right. I mean, a lot of the announcements have already been made, although I think, we are also seeing the benefit of low base. So therefore, the rise that we will get in the future would also reflect the arithmetic of a low base. But it's important to get inflation up. It's important to get nominal GDP up. And I hope, 2.5–3% inflation, which will lead to a targeted growth rate of 10.5%, 11% in the future, will augur well for India. But I think the anchor is the debt to GDP ratio now, which is a good sign.
Right.
And I think to be able to maintain that debt to GDP ratio at the projected level, it is important for there to be inflation. Now, the government cannot put more money into the hands of the people because it's already done that in the past through GST reform, to direct tax reform. Therefore, you need to boost consumption, you need to boost consumption expenditure. And this is where I think what Shubhamoy was saying becomes, which is improve the tax to GDP ratio.
Right.
So
we leave it at that. Thank you so much, Rajat Kathuria, Prasanjit Basu, and Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee for joining us with your inputs. But our comprehensive coverage of Budget 2026-27 is going to continue here. We'll take a short break, but our colleagues are going to join us in a bit. Stay tuned.
Thank you, and stay with us.